name is Alex Frank, your host of Locked On Bearcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Cincinnati Bearcats last night fall into Utah Valley in the NIT quarterfinals. The Bearcats season coming to an end, record 23-13. Disappointing loss to say the least. I really felt like the Bearcats had a chance last night to advance to the NIT semifinals in Las Vegas, but nevertheless, a successful run through the NIT, a successful ending to what I think, given the circumstances that still surround this program, is a successful season. And I think at the end of the day, that is what I think about, that this team was successful this season. They came into this season with a lot of questions. They came into this season with a lot of need to improve. Final score last night, 74-68 in Orem, Utah. The Bearcats falling to the Wolverines of Utah Valley. Score was 39-33 at halftime. Both teams scored 35 points in the second half. Landers Nolly leading the way with 23 points. How about this for a stat? The Bearcats last night attempted 79 shots. Utah Valley just attempted 55. And with that, we'll bring in the man, the myth, the legend of all Bearcats and Sports Illustrated. That would be none other than my colleague, Russ Heltman. Russ, I just told our listeners, and I don't know if you've seen the box score in full detail yet. Good to have you on. The Bearcats last night attempted 79 shots. Utah Valley attempted 55, yet the Bearcats still lost by 6. How do you explain that?
Oh, man, it's tough to explain. The best way to explain it is you just got to look at the free throws, and you can see how the Utah Valley Wolverines brought the physicality to the Bearcats in front of the fervent crowd there at the UCCO Center, I think it's called, the first nationally televised game in the history of that school's basketball program. That? So, yeah. As some fans were saying on Twitter on Wednesday night, that new floor at Fifth Third Urbina better be looking really good for them to have to give up that opportunity to play that game at home. But it is what it is. The Bearcats fought hard. They're a team that throughout this entire year, Alex, right to the bitter end, when they made it a 4-point game with under a minute left, they just refused to die. But unfortunately, they did not get that chance to come back to life once again. In that game, 74-68 loss to Utah Valley. Trey Woodbury was fantastic. That guy was a ball of energy. And, I mean, Utah Valley is a good team, Alex. You could say that was one of the 3 or 4 best teams they played on the road easily. They're a long team. Aziz Bandego was an absolute problem. 4 blocks, the Akron transfer. Where was he on the Bearcats' radar last year? Seemed like a trip from Akron to Cincinnati is a little bit easier to make than from Akron all the way to Utah Valley. He's a player that Cincinnati could really use on their team with that kind of length, that kind of athleticism, shot blocking ability. He was striking fear into every front court player on the UC Bearcats bench last night, namely Victor Locken, who fouled out, had another poor outing. He was not very good, did have a double-double, but was 5 of 11 from the field, just the 8th time this season he shot under 50% from the floor.
Tough loss, no doubt. And the free throws, as Rush, you alluded to, the Bearcats last night were just 8 of 10. They only attempted 10 free throws. 5 of those came from David DeJulius. We'll talk about him. Utah Valley, 19 of 29 from the free throw line. And, I mean, Landers and DeJulius attempted 49 combined shots and made just 16. So that's not going to win you games. Jeremiah Davenport was 0 for 6, didn't score last night, could have used at least 2 threes from him in a 6-point game. So no doubt disappointing, but as Russ, you mentioned, an epitome of this team was their ability to never quit, regardless of the circumstances. We'll get into it all right here on Locked On Bearcats.
Our Locked On Bearcats, your daily podcast on the Cincinnati Bearcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, as usual, if you have a question or a comment for us, you can leave that in the chat. He's Russ Heltman, my colleague at all Bearcats and Sports Illustrated. I'm Alex Frank, the host of Locked On Bearcats. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Russ, happy National Puppy Day to your puppy.
Hey, thank you. She's right in front of me right now, sleeping on the couch. So she takes that National Puppy Day shout out very well. I love it.
Well, okay, see, yeah, that's what we do here. We acknowledge what's going on in the world, National Puppy Day. So, happy National
I don't
Puppy Day
even
to my
know
dog
that.
Cooper. I
There's so
love
many
you.
days, Alex. I get them. I can't keep them all straight. I can't keep all the
Yeah,
national days
well,
straight.
I'll tell you what. Happy National Puppy Day to my dog Cooper. I love you and hope you're having a great day. Russ, let's get into it. The Bearcats last night against Utah Valley. I think we already mentioned what we saw last night, but anything else you saw last night that maybe played a big part in the Bearcats season coming to a disappointing, but I still think, and we'll talk about this, a successful season, but a disappointing ending.
Yeah, I would agree there. I mean, yeah, we'll dive into the overall season as a whole, but just kind of bow on the game last night. It was just kind of the similar things that we've seen from this team all year. What definitively last night showed me is that in these March environments, especially these hostile environments where you're going on the road or you're going to be in neutral site arenas where you might not have the home fan advantage in terms of percentage wise in the crowd, the front court consistency just it has to be better in this roster. Victor Locken is an ascending player, but he has to keep ascending. He has to get in even better shape. He's gotten in great shape over one offseason in the Monster Factory. Time to double that up once again with Michael Reffelt and continue that work with the sports performance team and add that definitive force down low. You cannot whiff if you're Wes Miller and the staff on your front court transfer addition, which I'm assuming there will be one this year. You cannot whiff on that addition. Now, as of right now, the team does not have any open roster spots because their three outgoing seniors or players without eligibility left are already getting replaced by Davion Thomas, Jizzle James, and Rayvon Griffith. We all know that there's going to be two. I would say I would be shocked if there's not at least two more open spots on this roster because of outgoing, exiting transfer players, maybe three more. So last night proved to me that you cannot put that much emphasis, that much weight on your scoring guards and expect to consistently be able to win road games, consistently get great performances out of them. Alex, as you mentioned, they were at 16 of 49 from the field, did Landers Nolly and David DeJulius. David DeJulius in the final 5 games of the season. Yeah, 16 to 49. David DeJulius, after going 2 of 4 against SMU and scoring 30 points, Alex, he went 1 of 22 from the three-point line the rest of the season. The entire postseason, he shot 1 of 22, 4.5% from the three-point line. And it was clear that they were not necessarily settling, but the best shots that they could get last night were those kind of in-between mid-range shots. Sometimes they were floaters. Sometimes they were leaners. Those bread and butter shots that Landers Nolly and David DeJulius love to take. Sometimes they go in. Sometimes they don't. Those are typically in the 45 to 52% range. Not the most efficient looks, especially when you're taking those shots 3 to 5 feet away from the rim, and shots 2 feet closer go in 63, 67% of the time. And you get those shots by getting a guy like Flory Badunga to reclassify and sign with your program, getting an impact transfer in the portal. One of these two things has to happen for this program to, I think, be able to tread water like it wants to in the Big 12 next year. And that's what that showed me last night, especially in the face. Alex, they haven't had to face a 7-footer like Aziz Bandago really most of the entire AAC play. Next season in Big 12 baller country, there's going to be some big fellas that are going to be giving them big problems if they do not address that front court position.
And who was the last big man that they faced, Russ? Was it Azulis?
Russell Chewa?
I was going to go Chubelis of Arizona, and then Russ, look what happened to Arizona last Thursday. When you and I talked last Thursday, that was a few hours before Arizona beat Princeton. And I want to ask you about the tournament when we wrap things up here. So let me ask you this. After I explained to our listeners, so Locken was 5 of 11 from the floor, but he did have a double-double, 10 points, 10 rebounds, did foul out. Odio Guama had a mere 2 points, only attempted 2 shots. That's not going to get you anywhere, as Rush, you were mentioning. 9 rebounds. Kalui Zikpe had 4 points, 2 of 2 from the floor in 5 minutes. That's pretty good. But, yeah, I mean,
there you go, 5 minutes right there. He's only on the floor 5 minutes. You got to be able to get – that was kind of the story all year, was 5 to 10 minutes a game out of Kalui Zikpe when you're anticipating and expecting going into this year 15 to 20 minutes of heavy impact play from Kalui Zikpe. And it was really just you'd feel him at some points here and there. There was that stretch in the kind of back half of the conference play where Locken went down and he really started to pop. But overall, it never really got going for Kalu and Clifton.
Unfortunately, we won't see him next year. David DeJulius has played his last game. So too has Rob Finney, although he sadly wasn't able to play last night due to an injury. But overall, Russ, are you viewing this season as a success for the Bearcats?
Yes, I would give it a B. B to B plus for the Bearcats. I think it's a success. You improve the win total year over year. You get to 23 wins on the season. You win multiple postseason games in your postseason tournament that you're invited to. You probably win that game at home against Utah Valley. You probably get a couple of those 6 of 25 threes to go in on your own home floor, and you end up making up the difference of the 6 points right there in that factor. So I'm not going to throw a bunch of stones at glass houses in terms of their loss to UVU. That's a solid program. It's been built up by Mark Madsen very well over the past few years. They've done a great job in the transfer portal. And that type of impact from that type of player, Aziz Bandago, can kind of maybe be a bridge wake-up call, not necessarily wake-up call, but definitive striking moment for this staff and this program saying, we got to be able to hit diamond picks in the transfer portal, especially moving from a transfer portal cycle of entering another AAC season to entering a Big 12 season, the best conference in college basketball, bar none, and a conference that overall I think is going to be a difficult transition for the Bearcats, but what they've done this season, I feel should make fans at least very confident in the plan this staff has moving forward. Maybe not all these guys on this roster or the roster that's going to get carried over to the 23 are going to be super successful, legendary Bearcats, save for maybe Dan Skillings. We'll see what ends up with his development. But I think the 23 wins across this season with the injuries and the impact that had throughout, the way this staff managed it, the way Wes Miller coached this team, should give fans confidence that he is worthy of that extension he already got through the rest of this decade for the most part, and is the guy to lead this program into the Big 12. Now it's about transfer portal season, which I think, Alex, is honestly going to be more interesting to me than this past season in the AAC, which was obviously expected. Fans were hoping to see NCAA tournament bids, see an NCAA tournament berth, but I don't think anybody really definitively thought this team was going to make the NCAA tournament. It always felt like another year to get better, to build the foundation up a little bit more, and then now this transfer portal session, it's going to be huge transfer portal few months here as we get into the back half of March and April, which is where we're really going to start to find some things out before the summer workouts start at the brand new floor in Fifth Third Arena.
I tell you what, I'm really looking forward to it. The transfer portal. I mean, you mentioned Aziz Bandago. I heard last year a lot, Russ, and this was before you and I started having you on the show. But I heard a lot about how the Bearcats did have a stretch four. And I think that's the kind of player they need, a stretch four. Someone who can do damage down low, but also can stretch out a little bit and hit those 15 to 17 footers and that occasional three. Kind of like a Trey Scott.
That's a good point.
Kind of like a Trey Scott. Well, it's interesting because they had Tari Eason 2 years ago. He transfers to LSU. LSU. Well, he was the only guy the Bearcats really didn't get back in the coaching change. You had Saunders come back. You had Madsen come back. There was another player who came back. I'm trying to remember who that player was. Maybe I'm thinking there was another player. But anyway, Russ.
Julius came back. He got retained.
He was going to stay regardless. Right. He was going to stay regardless. Now, here's something interesting about Russ. Did you know anything about Orem, Utah before the game last night?
Not a clue. I knew it was like right outside Provo. It's right by BYU. So Bearcats are going to be very near Utah Valley, but I doubt playing Utah Valley anytime soon, but very near them.
Okay, now
in the basketball and football programs.
Now, believe it or not, I told our viewers yesterday, there are some pretty notable people from Orem, Utah. There's some
Hit me with them. Who you got?
Okay, so we've got Julianne Hough for one.
Okay, actress.
Okay. We've got Chelsea Hightower from...
Never heard of her. Who's that?
She is a Dancing with the Stars alum. Actually, she might be thinking dance. One of those dancing shows. You have... I used to watch those shows. You have Donnie and Marie Osmond.
Yes, the
Osmonds. And you have a player who caught 2 touchdowns in an NFC Championship game in 2005 by the name of Chad Lewis. Member of the Philadelphia Eagles on that Eagles team that went to the Super Bowl under head coach Andy Reid. So just a little history there. And by the way, how this connects on to the Bearcats, Russ, did you know that Andy Reid has drafted more players from Cincinnati than any other school in his head coaching career?
Really? Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. I could see that. Yeah. From the Eagles to the Chiefs.
Yeah, including you got the Kelsey brothers in there too. All right, we're going to continue the basketball conversation. Guys who could come back next year. We'll tie a bow on David DeJulius and his legacy, what Russ thinks about that. We'll get into all that after I tell you how this episode of Locked On Bearcats is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Russ, I'm sure you had a great weekend of bets last week with the NCAA tournament. All those upsets, you knew exactly what was going to happen, right?
I got Fairleigh Dickinson. I got them on the spread, but it was a decent weekend of betting. It was a decent weekend. Check me out, Russ Held 11 on Action Network if you want to follow my bets.
Well, there you go. See, Russ gets it. The tournament is heating up, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets. If your first bet doesn't win, just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up today to claim your no-sweat first bet. Then you can wager on everything from the money line to point spreads, to which team will be cutting down the net, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use, so don't miss your shot. And a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Speaking of that, you got some fantastic games tonight in the Sweet 16. The East region in New York, and then the West region out in Las Vegas, including former Bearcats head coach Mick Cronin and UCLA taking on Gonzaga. And the last 2 times those teams have met in the tournament, they have delivered classic battles.
They've both been like 85-plus point games, right? But did both go to overtime or just one? I think only one.
Just one.
The Final Four game?
And Russ is to talk about the Final Four game. Yep, that went to overtime. And then the 2006 game did not go to overtime, but it came down to the bitter end. And
that's right. That was the Adam Morrison game. Yep,
it was. All right, back to the Bearcats. Landers Nolly, Micah Adams-Woods, and Jeremiah Davenport. All 3 can come back next year. I was having this conversation with some people this past week, Russ, and I was having this conversation last night with a friend of mine. Like, does Jeremiah transfer? Does he fit in the system? And I said, yeah, he fits in the system because, the Bearcats are a 3-point shooting team. That's what Wes Miller wants this identity to be. But then I think about Micah Adams-Woods. Does he think he can still fit in? Like, what are you hearing? What are you thinking right now, Russ? Give me a percentage chance for all 3 players to come back next year.
So we'll start with Landers Nolly. I would put it in the 40 to 55% range. He comes back, and it really, to me, is all about how that money's going to talk. How is the Cincy Reigns collective going to talk? How is that NIL money going to shake out and going to palatably be good enough for Landers Nolly to forego chances and opportunities to? I would imagine he can make high 6, low 7 figures playing overseas relatively quickly in his professional career. So that's something to consider there. And he loves playing in front of the Cincinnati fans. I really just think it's about whether or not this opportunity staying in the States playing for Cincinnati is going to cost him money compared to taking that professional chance and going somewhere else. I think it's really just about the dollars and cents at this point. All parties, I think, would love to make it happen in terms of bringing Landers Nolly back and making him the marquee face of the program heading into the Big 12. Micah Adams-Woods, I would say, to me, I would lean like 70 to 80%, 60 to 70%, something like that. Obviously, Jizzle James, to me, he's a player that you give the keys to immediately. There's going to be growing pains in this league off the bat, regardless. I think you want to give Jizzle James as much firsthand experience as a freshman as physically possible, if he's physically up to it and able to get the system down and all that stuff, and he's not completely lost as a freshman early on. But even with that, I think Micah Adams-Woods is a guy that would still want to come back, would still want to come play Big 12 basketball. He's going to have that opportunity to start, in my opinion, if there's an injury. If they're knock on wood, if there's an injury to Jizzle James or something like that, and maybe he can compete and win a starting job outright with no injuries. So he was kind of, I would imagine, given the same kind of scenario last year, being told we're going to bring in competition. Rob Finney is going to be joining the program. He's going to be there vying for that starting point guard job, all the same. And who won that job outright before Rob even went down, Alex? Mike Adams-Woods. He was your day one starter at the point guard position. So him alongside David DeJulius. So to me, I think that Mike has got a pretty high probability of coming back. I would imagine as long as his role is not downgraded significantly, there's no reason for him not to use his extra year of eligibility here. And then Jeremiah Davenport. I know that Wes has said he wants every single player with eligibility to come back to this team, but given the options in the transfer portal and given the league that you're going to for those options in the transfer portal to play in, it's going to have to take really no other better options in that front for me to think that this program wants Jeremiah Davenport to come back and play us at the same kind of role. It's just like he's gotten worse year over year. He did not really fit in well as a backup. He was decent as a backup, but never really has reached the heights of 2 seasons ago. And I don't know. I think it's just time for a new experience for both sides. Maybe they end up getting back together. I would say it's in the 30 to 45% chance that he comes back because of the comment that Wes made before the season ended. But then again, Alex, it's like, what is he going to say? When you're asked that question, what are you going to say? Yeah, I want these guys back, but I don't want JD back before we start a postseason run or before going to the AAC tournament and the NIT. No coach is ever going to say that. So I don't know that we totally got a truthful answer out of Wes, just like we didn't get a truthful answer out of Wes when we asked about Butler transfer guard Jaden Taylor, who could be a replacement for Jeremiah Davenport, and their interest in Jaden Taylor, which the program is very interested in Jaden Taylor. So it's just, you got to kind of comb through the smoke a little bit and try to parse out all that stuff. But to me, those are kind of the percentages I would put for those 3 players in question.
Remind our listeners what that comment was that you're alluding to that Wes Miller made about Jeremiah Davenport before the tournament.
Yeah, he said basically that every player with eligibility left, we want as a staff, we want them all back. That's what he said heading into the AAC tournament before the season ended. So it's like in that moment in time, what are you going to say? We're going to get a much more definitive answer. We'll see who enters the portal, who doesn't in the next week or so once these exit conversations are had with each player. But if you're the Bearcats, I think you kind of say, JD, we'd love to have you back, but we might be able to replace you with a better player. And if that option is there, you have to take it. You have to better the program. You have to make yourself as viable and as talented as possible heading into the toughest conference in America.
Yep, that's fair analysis right there. We're going to switch gears. Actually, I want to ask you this. I know that Julius struggled in the conference tournament and the NIT, but what is ultimately his legacy going to be at Cincinnati?
The bridge builder. He's a guy that kept things together. He's a complete leader. He's a player that ultimately won't be one of the greatest Bearcats of all time. I don't know if he's one of the 20 greatest Bearcats, top 25 greatest Bearcats of all time, because he didn't have any postseason success at all. Didn't have any, NIT quarterfinals, I'm not really going to call that postseason success. So there's higher standards here at Cincinnati, and I'm sure David DeJulius and everybody in that program would agree with me. So the fact that he didn't meet those heights, I think, keeps him from being talked about with the likes of a Sean Kilpatrick or a Troy Copain or a guard of that ilk. But the way he represented the CPAW, the way he ignited that crowd in his senior day performance, the way he kissed that CPAW with passion, it just all showed how much he cares about this program. And he kind of showed the right way to do things as a transfer in college basketball that's trying to find their way and trying to find the best situation possible. He goes from Michigan, comes to Cincinnati, gets tossed into a fervent, just firestorm of drama, of issues around the program, melds through it all, moves through it all, latches on the Wes Miller. Those two come together as a brain trust and help really spark improvement out of a program that was in dire straits 2 years ago. I mean, Alex, there was 4 or 5 players on the entire roster when Wes got here. It was a total barren wasteland, and they have built it up to palatable levels, not the levels that they wanted to reach heights-wise, but levels that I think everybody can commend David DeJulius and tip their cap to them when they see him at Bearcats games moving forward for the rest of the decades here.
Yeah, I totally agree. A player who, like AJ Green did for the Bengals, and Mo Egger talked about this. He kept the program together when it was at one of its most vulnerable points in that 2021 offseason. So that's a bow on that. We'll switch gears to the gridiron. Spring practice picked back up yesterday. Pro Day was today. We'll get into all of that after a word from two of our sponsors. All right, Russ Heltman back with me, all Bearcats and Sports Illustrated on Locked On Bearcats. Today's live room, this week live room. If you weren't able to tune in, that's okay. It's in podcast form. So, Russ, spring practice resumed yesterday after a 2-week layoff with spring break. What did you see at practice yesterday from the Cincinnati Bearcats? Or was yesterday a morning start, or was it?
It was an afternoon. I was able to catch most of the practice, talk to Taj Ward afterward. People can check out that conversation with the Bearcats starting nickel corner last year on All Bearcats. But in terms of like the offense and stuff, saw a little bit more meshing from the offensive line, saw some more run concepts starting to come together a little bit. I liked what I saw out of the offensive line in general. We didn't get to see any Luke Kandra on Wednesday. He did not practice. Obviously there was no disclosure on why he didn't suit up, but he was not out there. And overall, I think we're starting to see the offense pick things up a little bit, but the defense is still well ahead of the offense. And the guy who stood out the most to me on Wednesday, Alex, was Deshaun Pace. This dude is going to be a playmaker at the nickel position. He's really, really going to, I think, make a lot of great plays. His pass coverage has really improved year over year in my eyes. He was sticky like Stickum yesterday to those receivers, made 2 interceptions on the day. He was all over the field. And I think Deshaun Pace, after he said in the opening spring practice interview, I always play with a chip on my shoulder. But to me, I think with Ivan Pace going through the NFL workarounds, going through the NFL process before his brother, and just the fact that Deshaun is not involved in that this year, there's a real fire I can sense under Deshaun Pace that make him the best defensive player right alongside Dante Corleone on this defense in 2023 after not necessarily a down year, but not as exciting and eye-popping of a year from Deshaun Pace in 2022. I think it could be a big year for Mr. Pace in 23.
Wow. Entering his 4th season, it'll be his 3rd season as a starter. Had a great 2021 season with 4 picks, was the leading returning tackler on last year's team. Did, as Russ mentioned, have a down year last year, but the hope is in a new system led by new defensive coordinator Brian Brown that he can rebound this year. Russ, I talked about this earlier this week. I want to ask you, how good realistically can this defense be in 2023?
I think it could be a top 40, top 30 unit for sure. I definitely think so. With all the mix of talent and maybe even better. I think this defense, it has the highest ceiling of any unit on the team, maybe outside of Mason Fletcher as a punter, obviously, as a returning All-American. But yeah, I think this defense can be very good. We're starting to see I haven't gotten a strong sense in terms of the cornerback rotation just yet. They're cycling a lot of guys through, and I can't quite get a feel for who's getting the most love and getting the least love. And then the guy like Brian Threats, though, I mean, he's going to be an entrenched safety. He made a few plays yesterday, and I love what I've seen from him. Jamal Williams as well, linebacker, redshirt sophomore. He's been used in a little bit more of like an off-ball, not more on-ball position, actually. He's been on closer to the line of scrimmage more, at rushing as an edge rusher. He won a few reps yesterday and was talking some trash afterwards, so he could be a player that pops. There's some different names out there on this kind of meshed new-look defense that could help it really come together and turn into, in my eyes, what should be at least a top 30, 35 unit and maybe a top 20, 25 defense in the country.
Wow. How about that? Did you get a chance to go to Pro Day this morning?
I was not able to get there because of the day gig, but some good times for the Tucker and Scott 40-yard dashes, 4.32 unofficial 40s, Alex. That should help the draft stock a little bit.
That's great to see that, and great to see a bunch of the Bengals scouts. Great to see Zach Taylor, Mike Brown, Katie Blackburn on hand at the Bengals indoor practice facility. What is the name of that?
I think it's like IEL. It's some kind of like electric facility.
Yeah, IEL.
I just call it the Bengals indoor facility. It's fine.
The Bengals indoor facility. Okay, yeah. Justin Williams tweeting earlier today, the unofficial 40 times for both Tyler Scott and Trey Tucker. As you mentioned, Russ, 4.32. I thought one might have been different, but you're right.
And then Ivan
4.32.
Pace,
All right, so
4.540 as well. So showing off his speed out there in front of 56 NFL
good.
scouts from all 32 teams.
Yeah. I think that's still really good when you have 56 scouts, because that realizes that last year's team was actually pretty good. They just couldn't win the big games, and as that ultimately was their downfall last season. So here's a question to round out the show, Russ. So I talked about this over the weekend. You know, Bearcats went to 9 straight NCAA tournaments. They only got out of the first round 5 times. But when you look at how hard it is now for blue bloods and big name schools to win in the first round, it should kind of make you appreciate what the Bearcats have done. Did you know this, Russ? Kansas has lost in the second round of the NCAA tournament 6 times in the last 13 tournaments.
It makes sense. It's tough. It's tough.
And this is the Kansas Jayhawks we're
national
talking about
champs. Argue one of the 5 blue bloods. Yeah, one of the 5 blue bloods.
Yeah, and a team who had 15 quad 1 wins, and they lose to Arkansas who is an 8 seed. But here's something interesting that I think about, and I was at the Purdue Fairleigh Dickinson game on Friday.
You were there? That's awesome. Nice.
I was there, yeah. And funny enough, Kevin Kugler, I asked him before the game, I said, does Fairleigh Dickinson have a chance? He looks at me and he goes, no way. Well, okay.
Oh, Cougs.
I saw him after the game,
Cougs.
and I told him he is fantastic. He'll be calling the Xavier game tomorrow on Westwood 1 in Kansas City, our crosstown rivals. So, it hit me. Why there's so many upsets? Because it used to be you had 1 or 2 a tournament. Now you have like 4 or 5. But you know what's interesting to me, Russ? I think the advent of social media plays a role in this.
Okay.
And I want your opinion on this. Because I think about, because what trends on Twitter for these 3 weeks the most?
March Madness. And sports
Okay.
is, I guess. Yeah, March Madness.
And what schools are trending the most?
The Cinderellas.
Okay, and that might be true, but I'm thinking the Blue Bloods are trending. And you put the outside weight and expectations that social media creates on an 8, and Luke Fickle constantly talked about this, an 18 to 22-year-old, when there's already weight and expectations playing for a historic program like Duke or North Carolina. If you lose focus for one day in one game, your season's over. The small schools, they don't care if they lose. They're supposed to lose. Social media will blow up if they win, but it also is going to be there for the big schools to see, like, and it's so hard for a blue blood program to maybe keep its players away from social media and focus. And you lose that focus for one game, your season, done. Arizona, lose to Princeton. Purdue, lose to Fairleigh Dickinson. Kind of seeing it, Russ. You can't really – it's hard to stay in and lock focus now if you're an 18 to 22-year-old. Are you buying that?
I don't know if I'm buying like the social media part. I think the 18 to 22, like, yeah, it's hard to keep your composure. It's hard to get up and play your number 1 top-tier basketball. If you're one of these guys and you're Kansas, you got 15 quad 1 wins, and you're going up against it's Arkansas. You know, they haven't played that well this year. But wait, Arkansas has Nick Smith. Arkansas has all these 5-star prospects. Arkansas has a lot of talent, arguably more talent than Kansas. Bing, bang, boom, Kansas goes down. Flip side, Fairleigh Dickinson, Purdue isn't taking Fairleigh Dickinson probably as seriously as they should at all.
Yeah.
And Fairleigh Dickinson's coach, what does he know? What does he do? What's his name? Tobin Anderson, I think.
Tobin Anderson. Well, who now is going to Iona.
Yeah. So what does he say to his team on the first 4? I've been watching Purdue. I think we can beat this team. So to me, Alex, it's these lower tier coaches, these mid-major coaches, knowing the situations that they will be in March, the middle of March, in these first round venues, in these neutral site venues, and knowing the exact style of plays to practice with their teams throughout the entire season to be able to culminate in an upset victory like the one we saw from Princeton. I forget the head coach's name, but he was on he was on Tate Frazier's new podcast on The Ringer and did a great interview with him. And he talked about how
Mitch Henderson.
And Henderson was talking about how the entire season he was preparing his team to play with the physicality that would allow them to win the glass against a major power team. And therefore, when you win the glass, the Bearcats, perfect example. You see 20-2 this season when they win the rebounding battle. They lost the rebounding battle and lost the game against UVU. When you win the rebounding battle, even if you're a David versus Goliath, you give yourself such a better opportunity to win basketball games. It's not really rocket science. And I think the fact that these higher level schools, they have to worry about so many different things. They have to worry about the transfer portal. They have to worry about recruiting their own players in the middle of the season to make sure they don't leave after the year, versus these mid-major coaches whose only job is to be able to get that one Cinderella run, that one victory in the NCAA tournament, that 2 wins in 1 weekend in the NCAA tournament, and you're set for life. Tobin Anderson goes from D2 coach, brings 3 D2 players. They start against Purdue a year later, and then a year later he's coaching at Iona with a huge come up and an even bigger raise and all that stuff. So the fact that they have such a, I think, smaller goal to hit and goal to achieve gives them that advantage against these major power schools in these moments where they know they've been preparing for this moment. They've been preparing to bring the physicality to Arizona to win the glass. All that kind of stuff leads to these upsets in what is the greatest tournament in sports. It is. And the fact that these players are also, for a lot of them in these smaller schools and the big schools at the same time, they're playing high-level basketball, a lot of them, for the last time ever. I saw I forget the journalist. He did a great job with this. I feel bad not shouting him out, but somebody went on Twitter and did a thread of like March Madness Cinderella heroes and where they are now. It's like guys that are principals in West Virginia selling insurance in Hoboken, New Jersey, that were winning NCAA tournament games and lighting up all our weekends 2 or 3 decades ago. So it's all of those culminating factors, and it's why it makes it so difficult and so tough to win 6 straight games over a 3-week span in this tournament.
Well, one March Madness hero, and by the way, you know who else used to sell insurance? Scott Satterfield. So, but
full circle.
But and that's a great point, Russ. And those guys, you know, you see those commercials. There are over 400,000 NCAA student athletes, and just about all of us will go pro in something other than sports. And I quote the great Jerry Rice on that. And it's true. When you see, like, I mean, I think about who's a March Madness here from a mid-major school. Steph Curry's still playing. We know that.
Dame Lillard, Weber State.
Yeah, Damian Lillard is still playing. Obviously, I know I'm blanking. I mean, you can think about whoever. I mean, think about the guys from UMBC. Have you heard their names recently?
Right, Lagu from Northern Iowa, Farouk Kaleshvili. Remember his name? Farouk Kaleshvili, the guard from Northern Iowa that took out Kansas, one of those second round.
Ali Faroukmanesh.
He's selling insurance. He's one of the guys selling insurance or something. It's like crazy.
Yeah, man, that's a pretty good story. And it's a great point too, Russ. Like these small schools, that is their national championship. I'm at like, and let me tell you this too, Russ. Like, I know
that firsthand. When OU beat Virginia 2 years ago, Alex, I haven't experienced a fandom feeling like that ever.
Not even when
I'm a Bengals fan. When the Bengals went to the Super Bowl, it did not feel like that OU feeling felt. You know why?
Really?
Because I paid to go to that school. I am a entrenched alumni. I am part of the fabric of that school. I'll never be a part of the fabric of the Bengals. I'll never be part of the fabric of anything like you are a part of your college fabric. And that's why it matters and feels so much different and so much more special than anything else.
That's a great point. I'm gonna pick up on that next week. Because I got to crank out content in April and May, and we're still 5 days a week. So
hey, got the live room with me now, so that's one day.
Well, that's one. The live rooms are going to be interesting. Yeah, I mean, we should do
more conversations like this.
We should do what Paul and Jay do. Paul Dana and Jay Morrison. They invite guys to come up on their stage in their live rooms for the Athletic. We should start doing that for Locked On Bearcats, and maybe James Rapine will join us for some of our live rooms. We do have one question or one comment from Pete Crawley 513 in the chat. Losing to a 16 seed with a 7-3 stars, the biggest letdown in tournament history. I would put it up there. I mean, I would say Michigan State losing to Middle Tennessee was bad. I would Virginia losing by 20 to UMBC was bad. I mean, that came out of nowhere.
It's definitely Virginia against UMBC. I don't think. I mean, they lost by double. They lost by 20 plus points.
Yeah. Fairleigh Dickinson.
It's definitely Virginia.
And it's not
Fairleigh
like
Dickinson. It's 1-2 in my eyes, but there is a tier above with the Virginia loss to UMBC. They lost to a 16 seed by 20. Like that's crazy.
Fairleigh Dickinson didn't even play that well. I mean,
no, and then to Pete Crawley's point, Fairleigh Dickinson, they didn't not only well, I'm not gonna say they didn't play well, but they didn't even win their league, Alex. Merrimack won the NEC.
Yeah, they weren't even an automatic qualifier. They weren't even an automatic.
Merrimack is not allowed to play in the NCAA tournament because they just got moved up to D1, and so that's why Fairleigh Dickinson got to get in with multiple D2 players from the year before. Just amazing. What a tournament! What a sport! Unfortunately for the Bearcats, the season has wrapped. As
I do
who
miss
is it? It's going to be Vandy and UVU in the NIT.
I mean, that's a good matchup, actually. Hey, how about for your second listen, you check out our brand new podcast, Locked On College Basketball experts Isaac Shade and Andy Patton, bringing you everything you need to know on and off the court. Plus, hear from big-name experts, coaches, and players, throughout the basketball landscape. Locked On College Basketball is available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Good luck to Andy Patton and his Gonzaga Bulldogs tonight. He's the host of Locked On Zags for us. They got a big game tonight. Tonight against UCLA. The South and the Midwest regions are tomorrow. So we will be back next week. We will, we'll for sure hit on football. Russ, the countdown is on. We are just over 3 weeks away from the spring game.
That we are. We're getting very close.
Russ, we've been starting to do this on Thursday, but I think we got to do it on a different day next week because next Thursday is a holiday in Cincinnati.
What is it?
It is opening day.
Oh, I don't care about that. Who cares?
Yeah, on that note, thanks for listening to this week's live room of Locked On Bear.
UAB and UVU, not Vanderbilt. I'm mistaken about that. UAB versus UVU.
UAB versus UVU.
I was really hoping to see Jelly Walker, Alex. I was really hoping to see what Wes Miller's game plan was going to be against Jelly Walker. Alas, we don't get to see it.
Alas, we've entered the offseason, my favorite time of the year on this podcast. And Russ is my colleague at All Bearcats and Sports Illustrated. I'm Alex Frank for Locked On Bearcats. Have a great rest of your day. We'll be back next